Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So guys, you've heard me make the point that things outside of yourself are for the most part ambiguous. I'm often enamored and terrified that people they assume that the things that they're taking in is true, or they assume that those things are not true, as opposed to those things being somewhat hazy and ambiguous. It's like you can't necessarily believe hard any particular way because there's no particular way to know which one is actually true. But the catch is, I guess the point of this particular video is, there are often things that are put on the public itself, that are put through the media and through the news, and use those structures that exist in order to get the public to believe something that is not necessarily true. It's done purely because the government wants to push a particular agenda. We want to do X, all right, we're going to put out this particular bit of information in order to get the public in this particular direction. We need an excuse. Policy, the things that come up in the media, the things that come up in politics, oftentimes really does boil down to, we want to accomplish this, so we tell the public that. That gives us pretext to do this. That in the situation wasn't all that important in the first place. Nixon is terrified that African Americans, that blacks and hippies are going to come together in some kind of political union. You put the drug war out. You use the drug war as a way to castigate blacks and hippies. You put them in prison. You get rid of their voting rights. And at the end of the day, you're in a situation where you can break up what you consider to be a political threat. Same thing with Cuba. You put out information in the JFK files showing that there were thoughts about creating a false flag with Cubans in order to create a pretext in order to attack Cuba. Mind you, they tried to kill Castro God knows how many times. There's another one. JFK files. I missed this one yesterday, or I missed this one last week, and I think I wanted to do this story and just missed doing this story. Give me 1 second. My dog broke my television. I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. The United States planned false flag attacks to start war with the Soviet Union, JFK documents show. Now, I don't think anybody is necessarily blown away by this. At least I don't think so. But I show this for a very particular reason. When stuff comes out, whether we're talking about 9/11, whether we're talking about the shootings that took place, whether we're talking about the thing that took place in Vegas, whatever, any particular event that takes place, if we know as a flat fact that there are things that happened in the past that weren't necessarily the way that the media, that the government that was putting out a particular story that wasn't necessarily true and wasn't necessarily accurate, and you find out 10, 15, 20 years later that it wasn't real. If you know that, if you know there's a history of that from the beginning of this country to now, why would you look at any random event that takes place, any random event that the media puts out and looks at that as if it's coming from the Word of God? Why? You have a history of these things being untrue. You have a history of them lying. You have a history of them putting out a story that's false in order to create some kind of pretext for war. Why would any rational human being look at what comes out as if it's the Word of God? That's what I'm getting at. Let's go through the story for a moment. So, let's see. U.S. government planned false flag attack to start a war with the Soviet Union, JFK documents show. I'm not going to go through the entirety of the document, but what it boils down to is the United States was either going to buy or build Russian jets, to use those Russian jets as a way to feign an attack, to get a pretext in order to start some kind of war with the Soviet Union if that was necessary. The U.S. government once wanted to plan false flag attacks with the Soviet aircraft to justify war with the USSR or its allies. Newly declassified documents around the assassination of President John F. Kennedy shows. In a 3-page memo, members of the National Security Council wrote, there is a possibility that such aircraft could be used in deception operations designed to confuse enemy planes in the air, to launch a surprise attack against enemy installations, or in provocation operations in which Soviet aircraft would appear to attack United States or friendly installations to provide an excuse for U.S. intervention. We want to get involved in this particular conflict or that particular conflict with the Soviet Union. We don't necessarily have an immediate pretext to get involved in this particular conflict or that particular conflict with the Soviet Union or one of its nations. Hey, we have an idea. We have a Soviet aircraft. let's use that aircraft to attack some installation of ours or something with us. And we can say we found these aircrafts attacking these particular installations that belong to us in our interest, and now we need to go to war because they attacked something that belonged to us in our interest. What do you think the media in the United States would do with that information? The media would come out and say, hey, the Soviet Union attacked this particular installation of the United States, and the military is seeking a response. From that point on, anything that the United States does is justified because the Soviet Union attacks us initially. Mind you, the pretext for that was a lie. The Gulf of Tonkin was a lie. The thing that started the Spanish-American War was a lie. All of these things were lies. All of these things were lies. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. But in each and every one of those conflicts, the media told water for the government, and the media told the story that the government was putting out. This would have been no different. Be very skeptical of what your government tells you with regards to ideas of war and military and everything else. Ultimately, at the end of the day, your government has a history of lying profusely to you. Your media has a habit of carrying those lies to you as being the apparatus or the arm of the apparatus of state media to get across their narratives of what they want the public to believe is taking place. Be cynical and be skeptical. These people lie. These people lie. I will leave it at that. This is not a long one. This is purely to get across this idea that when you have these polished people with these, plastic faces looking at you in the news, and they're telling you things as if these things are flat, fat, absolute reality. And anything that goes contrary to the narrative that they themselves are putting out as somehow conspiracy theories or crazy. All of these things give some indication that the government and the media lied to you. They lied to you. Particularly in regards to issues of war. They understand that there are things that the government wants to do that are unsavory and gross. And they need you. At this point, they don't even need your approval for this, or they don't even need your consent. Back in those days, they actually wanted consent. They wanted you to believe a particular thing to get your public will behind this. At this point, we have a military that's separate and distinct from the rest of the population, and the president uses the military as his own killing ground. All I'm saying, and like I said, I don't want to go too far away from the basic point of the story. Be very skeptical of what media tells you. Be very skeptical of what the government tells you. These edifices, these things lie. And when a story is coming out, always ask the question about who does this benefit? Who does this benefit? Why are they pushing this particular direction, and who does this benefit? And it's not that I love this idea of being somewhat cynical and skeptical with the information that's relayed to me. But come on. I mean, if there is a history going back 100, 200 years of governments lying, of governments making shit up, and the media carrying the shit that the government is making up purely to get you to believe something because they want to do something, then certainly you have to look at this stuff with a certain amount of skepticism. I'm always enamored that the media toes the line of whatever the government says, and in no way looks at information like this with any level of skepticism at all. They just toe the water. I'm saying you should necessarily take what they're saying as being the word of God, and you should look at this stuff somewhat skeptically. They have a history of lying. I will leave it at that. Alright guys, if you enjoy the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support through Patreon. And Merry Christmas, by the way.